Today we're creating inspirational word art using watercolors. My words of choice for the new year are dare greatly. And this saying comes from the one and only Brené Brown. For those of you who don't know who Brené Brown is, you absolutely must. She is a professor, a speaker, a podcast host, an author, and she's known for her research on shame, vulnerability, empathy, and leadership. I've read most of her books, including Atlas of the Heart, The Gifts of Imperfection, and of course, Daring Greatly. Brené Brown defines daring greatly as the courage to be vulnerable, to show up and be seen, to ask for what you need, to talk about how you're feeling, and have the hard conversations. For me, these words are a challenge to stop putting on a facade, to be a people pleaser. When I'm focused on pleasing others and hiding my own thoughts or desires, I tend to lose sight of who I am because I'm afraid of what people will think of me. A lot of us hide our true selves because we think we'll be judged for it, and we ignore or stifle our feelings instead of acknowledging them and, as Brené says, having the hard conversations. Now, don't worry, I'm not going to turn this channel into Emily's therapy session or anything. You guys are watching my channel, I'm assuming, for watercolor instruction, so we're going to do that today. But you all really need to know Brené Brown and her books. She's given our generation an entire vocabulary so that we can speak our feelings in a way that opens up communication and empathy between people. Truly outstanding stuff. So now on to the tutorial. Choose one or two words that mean something to you, and we're going to make some splashy watercolor word art. Supplies you'll need are a printer, a pencil, a water jar, and a paper towel, transfer paper, or you can trace using a light box or window light, cold pressed or rough pressed watercolor paper. I'm using Canson Heritage 140 pound rough pressed paper today, one large and several small watercolor round brushes, and some analogous paint colors of your choice. If you're not sure what that means, analogous colors are simply colors that are close together on the color wheel. For example, I'll be using purples, pinks, and oranges, and some yellows because I think they look amazing together, and I'm also using granulating colors. These are from the Daniel Smith Master Artist Jean Haynes set. This is Imperial Purple, Quinacridone Magenta, Opera Pink, Aussie Red Gold, Nickel Azo Yellow, and I'm also throwing in some Hansa Yellow Light. Granulating colors look super cool when you're using lots of water because of that pebbly sort of separated effect that they produce. So if you have colors on your palette that granulate, use those. I tested out my color scheme on a scrap piece of paper before fully committing. This is always a great idea if you're just not sure what colors you want to use. It will also allow you to practice wet on wet blends between the colors and just see how they flow and interact with each other. Alright, so you've chosen your word or words. The first thing you'll need to do is design your word art in a computer program. You could use Photoshop like I'm using here, or Microsoft Word, or Canva would work really well too. Choose a thicker font and blow it up big so that it will fit on an entire sheet of printer-sized paper, and you're going to want to print it in a nice large size. Print your word art and then use transfer paper or a light box to trace it onto your watercolor paper. Because I chose two words, this project took me quite a long time, so keep that in mind. One word is definitely simpler. Once you've traced on your letters, you're ready to start painting them in. I recommend having several small brushes on hand, each dedicated to a different color. This will save you so much time rinsing and reloading your brush with each new color, since we're going to be going back and forth between the colors really quickly. Our goal is to create soft, seamless blends between those colors and this kind of rainbow effect on each letter. This is achieved with the wet and wet technique. Start by painting clean water inside your first letter. You can even just start with one section of one letter, especially if it's double-sided. For example, the D has two sides, so you could just start with one side. Load up one of your small brushes with your first color using a creamy paint consistency. You don't want to use watery or even milky paint. No extra water in your brush, otherwise it will just explode. Keep in mind that the amount of water on your paper combined with the amount of water in your brush will decide how quickly that paint flows. I started with Quinacridone Magenta and dabbed it in the upper left corner of the letter D. I quickly switched to a second brush, loading it up with creamy Opera Pink, dabbed this just below the magenta, trying to stay carefully inside of my pencil lines. Then I switched to Aussie Red Gold, Nickel Azo Yellow, and then pink again. You can definitely see why it's really helpful to have several brushes loaded with different colors. It saves a lot of time. Continue this technique of putting down color next to color, wet on wet, for each letter. I tried to mix up the starting color on each letter so that there's a variety in the yellow and pink shapes. I didn't want them to all look identical. For the lowercase letters, I left out the yellows and just used magenta, opera, and Aussie Red Gold. This way the letters really stand out strong with no lighter values, potentially weakening their impact. Next, use a pencil to lightly trace out an outline around each letter. This will mark the areas we want to avoid with our splashy background and will create a nice bold white stroke, helping the letters stand out even more. I'll show you a couple of ways you can approach painting around the letters. This first method involves loading up your small brush with tons of dark paint in a milky consistency and dabbing tiny dots of paint all along your penciled outline. You can definitely do this in sections. Then load up a larger brush with more juicy paint and more water. Use this to grab hold of that edge of those dots and pull the color outward away from your letter. It's okay if hard edges form and if it looks kind of splashy, that's really what we're going for. So embrace that kind of chaotic splashy look. Here I used Imperial Purple and Quinacridone Magenta for my background colors. To add even more fun splashy effects, you can also blow the paint in the corners. Using a straw will definitely give you more control. I just didn't have one. You can also sprinkle on some salt. Lots of creative options here. Another way to approach painting around the letters is to simply create a thick line of paint around them and then continue to spread that color around with your larger brush. To ensure good control, just make sure you're using a small brush when you're painting around that white outline around each letter. Feel free to tilt your board and turn it upside down to get the best edges. It can be really tricky painting around all those straight edges and delicate curves, so turn your board as much as you need to. Fill in the centers of letters with solid paint, matching the darkest values in your background splashes. And for a final effect, you can add some spatter using a brush loaded with watery paint. Take a second brush and tap your wet paintbrush, releasing droplets over your painting. I like to focus on the outer edges of the composition. I found this project to be so relaxing, and I enjoyed listening to an audiobook while I painted. If you decide to try this, I'd love to see your word art. Post it on Instagram and tag me at @eolsonart and I'll check it out. Leave me a comment. Let me know what authors inspire you. Thanks for watching and I'll see you soon.